There you go. The
There you
arrow,
go.
not the red thing, the arrow.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Okay. So again,
We got it, Jane.
those of us that are looking, those of you that are looking on YouTube, we have ladies in house here and ladies on Zoom, and we have prayed ourselves in. We've sung worship to the Lord, and now we are getting into our study. We're going to do Psalms 5 and 6 first, and then we will be in our book of Numbers, chapter 13 through chapter 18. And Psalms are always great, and they're personal, and I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time, because you can get into the Psalms, and you should be reading the Psalms every day along with your chapter, and maybe a Proverbs, just to give you, and of course in the study you're reading the Psalms every week, but it's cool to read one every morning. What we sang in this is in Psalms 5, give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning, give attention to the sounds of my cry, my King and my God, for to you do I pray. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice, in the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. And here, you know David's story. David's out in the wilderness as it is. He's being chased, people are after him. He's got enemies on all sides, nothing that we could imagine. And yet he's a man after God's own heart. He's a man that no matter what happens in his life, he's able to turn around and look to the Lord for relief, for strength, and for direction. And in the first three verses, first of all, he asked God to consider his groaning, to think about, Lord, where I'm at, and then he says, for to you do I pray. And it's important when we pray to make sure that we direct our prayers to the Lord. A lot of times you just sit down and people start praying, but it's to you, Lord, to the one to the God of, do I pray to you and inquire of you. And here David is praying in the morning, and it's really important to begin your day with prayer. In chapter 4, he prayed at night when he went to bed in order to get sleep. In chapter 5, he prays first thing in the morning. So David is a prayer, and we will see him down the road praying in the afternoon. And he's a prayer, but he wants to begin his day with the Lord. And he says in verse 4, you're not a God who delights in wickedness, and evil may not dwell with you. The boastful aren't going to stand before your eyes. You hate evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. So, as we draw close to the Lord, we really are aware of how holy he is and how sinful we are. And David gets that he doesn't like evil. God is not a God that he's not going to put up with certain things. And he's speaking about his enemies at the moment. He said, but I, verse 7, through the abundance of your steadfast love or your mercy, it is, will enter your house. I like that. And I put my name in there, but Trish, through the abundance of your steadfast love, and I had mercy over that, I'm going to enter your house. And that's a great verse. I will bow down toward your holy temple in fear of you. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness. Yes, Lord, because of my enemies, make your way straight before me. David doesn't say make my way straight. He says make your way straight. When you follow the Lord, his way is straight. He doesn't take you over and under and stepping on pebbles and having to look around corners and try and figure out where you're going. His way is straight. So David says, make your way straight before me. Our confidence is in God's mercy and his steadfast love. And his mercy and his steadfast love. There's so much of that today, this week for me. There's no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destructive. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Make them bear their guilt, oh God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Moses said that too, you know. And we're supposed to pray for our enemies that they are saved. But here David is saying that these guys are rebelling against you. They're speaking against you, Lord, as well as me, and make them bear that guilt because they've rebelled against you. And then in verse 11, let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy. Spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exult in you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield. You know, that verse where it says those who love your name, remember the name is the character. The name is everything that Jesus is. It's in it. It's his character. It's who he is. It's his grace, his mercy, his love, his long suffering, his compassion. People who love that, who exalt in that, he blesses. And God covers us with favor as with a shield. And we have permission, we have a command to pray for joy for ourselves. It's a promise. Pray for joy and have joy. We should all have the joy of the Lord. Joy is because we're saved and we're going to heaven. Joy is because we don't have to deal with the junk every day and in our own selves, and God deals with it for us. And that's the joy. Happiness is fleeting. Happiness is momentarily, but the joy of the Lord should never be away from us. And Psalm 6, O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. Heal me, O Lord. My bones are troubled. Don't know what the sin was. Even when you look back through the things, you don't know where David was at the time. But because of whatever it was, I guess he feels like he's being rebuked by God, being disciplined by God. But we know God's discipline is not because he's mad at us. It's because we are his kids. Who's got Hebrews?
Hebrews 12:7.
Mm-hmm.
It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline?
Yep. If you're being disciplined, it's because you're a daughter of the Lord. And if you're not ever been disciplined by the Lord for anything, ooh, that's probably either you have a lot coming or you are super, super good. I don't know, but no, the Lord,
You're fooling yourself.
yeah, the Lord does,
Recognize that good.
the Lord disciplines us because we're his kids and he loves us. And verse 3, my soul also is greatly troubled, but you, oh Lord, how long? I mean, we need to accept God's discipline as chastisement, but in that chastisement, in that discipline, he wants us to draw closer to him. That's what it is there for. So David's saying, how long, Lord, do I have to be in this place? And but God's trying to do a work in the place that he's in. And he says, verse 4, turn, O Lord, deliver my life. Save me for the sake of your steadfast love or your mercy. Oh, I love that. We ask God for deliverance on the grounds of his mercy. That's why you can ask him. The mercy seat, right, in the ark. And he says, for in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise? Verse 6, I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows weak because of all my foes. Verse 8, depart from me, all you workers of evil. So perhaps the sin that is leading up to this discipline that he's in is maybe the association with some ungodly people or evil people, because it seems to be that's where he went. For the Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my plea. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies shall be ashamed and greatly troubled. They shall turn back and be put to shame in a moment. Power of prayer. What David said, no matter where he's at, and David was in a lot of places, but no matter where he was, God is showing us that he prayed God said, I listened, and there was results. Things turned around. Every single time David is in a place, he prays. God lets us know God hears, and God lets us know that he acts, because the whole time he was being chased by his enemies and his son and everything else, at the end of the day, he didn't die. And he came back and was king. But the power of prayer, knowing that God hears your prayer when you pray, and knowing that you can ask him anything because of his mercy and his steadfast love. He loves you very, very much. He knows the hairs on your head, and he wants to bless you. He wants you to be safe. He wants you to weep before him. Don't be lax in weeping before the Lord, break down before the Lord. He already knows, and don't hold back from him the feelings that are inside of you, that whatever it is, just let go. And remember, the passionate prayers, the fervent passionate prayers sometimes are what's missing in our life. We want our prayers to just really to be there, and I love those kind of prayers, when you get to that place where you really just break down in front of the Lord, and the results of it, how he answers and what he does and what he leads you out of, is just unbelievable. Now we're back in Numbers, and we're beginning in chapter 13 in Numbers. And so the Lord in chapter 13 is speaking to Moses, and he says, send men out to spy the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord. All of them men who were heads of the people of Israel. And then it's going to get into their names. So it seems that this is according to a command from God, that this is according to God's plan, but that's not the case. Who's got Deuteronomy?
I do.
Deuteronomy 1:20-23.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Then all of you came near me and said, let us send men before us, that they may explore the land for us, and bring us word again of the way by which we must go up in the cities into which we shall come. The thing seemed good to me, and I took 12 men from you, one man from each tribe.
So we see in Deuteronomy that that's not what the Lord wanted to do, that was the people coming. The people had persuaded Moses to send out spies. But the Lord is going to allow this because the people want it. The Lord never forces his will on us. Remember when the people cried Saul, they wanted a king like every other nation? You want a king? Okay, go out and here's this guy. You're going to be sorry you asked for it, but I'll give it to you. Same thing here. So he allows it, and they went in to look at the land, the spies. And it says these were their names, and Shemu, I'm not going to go through all the names, but you do recognize in verse 6 that there is Caleb. And then in verse 8, that is Joshua, Hosea, Joshua. That is the two of them. But they went in, and they're going to look at the land. Why are they going in? God didn't tell them to do it, but they're doing it because of fear and unbelief, not because of faith. Remember, there was just all those accusations against Moses. They were challenging his authority. All that stuff was going on. And now Moses is a little gun shy when it comes to now the people are asking him something. And so He's a little bit more manipulated because he's thinking maybe he's not the best leader. You know, after all that, I mean, you've got 3 million people hollering at you and even though the Lord stood up for him. But I can imagine he's feeling not so confident at the moment. And so he gives in. But God had already directed them. God had already seen the land. God knew what was there. God knew who was there. But they wanted to go and see the land for themselves. So we need to accept by faith where God is leading, because he's already been there. So they're going to walk by sight, not by faith, right? And then we've got Joshua, or in verse 8, that's Joshua. His name is the same as Jesus's name. Jesus is Greek.
Is Yeshua?
Joshua or Hoshea, Yeshua is Hebrew, and it means salvation. So Joseph's name, Joseph, means salvation. But these guys are all 10 are leaders. None of them except 2 take a stand of faith. So they're going to put the Lord, they're going to put their trust. Huh?
All 12, not all 10.
No, 2 of them put their trust in the Lord.
Yeah, the 10, you said all 10, but 2 of them put trust in the Lord, but
Right.
it's all 12 and 2
all
of them.
12 leaders, yeah,
Yes,
and two
they
of
were
them
one,
are going to put.
they would be one from each tribe.
Right, one from each
Yeah.
tribe. And we have 2 of them that are going to
Strong.
go by faith.
Yep.
But 10 of them took a stand of faith and put their trust in the Lord. So we see where ungodly leaders or leadership can take a whole nation. Does that not resonate with us? As we look at these leaders, these 12 leaders step forward, and what these 10 do, the 2 that are trusting in the Lord, but what the 10 leaders can do to the whole nation of Israel, where it takes them and what happens to them is just, we see it today. We see it all. And then in verse 17, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them to go up to the Negeb and into the hill country, see what the land is, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities are camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, if there's trees in it or not. Be of good courage, bring some of the fruit back. And now it was the season of first ripe grapes. So they went up, verse 21, into the land. And he said, see what the land is like. They wanted to, again, to look at the land they wanted to see it by sight, not by faith, right? And so they insist on seeing what God does not want them to see. They want to see, God just said, go in, go straight in, don't stop, don't pass go, don't collect $200, go straight into the land I have given you, I have prepared for you. But no. They want to see what God doesn't want them to see. And they want proof of what God said. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, but they want proof that that's what it is. That's a bad place to be. When you do that, it's going to cause you to backslide. We always need to be going forward in faith, not stopping and trying to check out what God promises you. If you're praying for a house, or something, and God leads you forward into it, you don't stop and look and see, well, God, but you said you were going to give us one, but we want to go, and check. And that's probably a poor example, but you don't want to go ahead of him and try and check out what he's promised, because you got to check out his. But I think you get the idea. Go forward in faith instead of by sight. And then in verse 22, they went into the Negeb and came to Hebron. And they see these guys, and they're the descendants of Anak. And this little thing in quotes in your Bible, Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Only Moses would know that. It was a special hideaway for the Egyptian pharaohs back in the day. So only Moses would have that little information there. They came to this valley, and they cut down this cluster of grapes that was so big that they had to carry them on a pole, right, between two people. And they get pomegranates and figs. And verse 25, at the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. So the Anakites, giants, they took these grapes, and they found exactly what God said they'd find. God said it was a land flowing with milk and honey. It was fruitful, and they actually found what God said they'd find. Who's got Exodus 3?
Me. 3 verse 8. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites.
So God knows who's there, right? He knows all the people that are there. He's naming off. I know they're there. And he said it's a land flowing with milk and honey. And so they're finding it's exactly what God said it was, but they had to go look, right? And then in verse 25, we see at the end of 40 days, remember 40 is the number of 40 days.
Jesus was in the desert.
So it's a number of testings,
Okay.
number of judgment, number of testings. So God allows this test. They were in this place for 40 days. And then he ends up judging them 1 year for every day of unbelief that they were in that land, because they're going to wander for 40 years, right? Yeah, 1 year for every day that they were there, that they saw what God had promised was real, but they didn't believe. Isn't that something? And we just learned that God's word's enough, right? You
But
believe
why-
it.
Why? What was the purpose of saying, no, it's not a good place?
They were afraid. They saw God didn't want them to go in because they saw the big guys. They saw the giants. They saw all that stuff.
Oh, okay.
And
So
they
would be
became
afraid.
afraid. But see, because God didn't want them to see that, because God was gonna wipe those guys out and
Right.
take them in there. And so you got to stand on his word. And it's interesting that in the Bible there are 8 times of testings throughout the Bible.
And it says in the Bible, he would have even your enemies be at peace with you. So he would have taken care of it.
Yeah, he does.
Trust and obey.
But 8 times in the Bible, 8 being the number of new beginnings, right? So 8 times in the Bible we see testings being the number 40. And every time there's a testing, there's something happens, there's a judgment with it, and then there's a new beginning. So 8 times in the Bible we have testings. I think that's just cool. And then in verse 27, in 26, they come to Moses and Aaron and to the congregation of the people, and they bring back word to the people and the congregation and show them the fruit. And they said, we came to the land to which you sent us. It does flow with milk and honey. This is the fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified. The cities are large. And we saw the descendants of Anak there. So the Anakites dwell in the land of the Negeb, verse 29. Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, God said they were there. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. So God had already said they were there. That's not a surprise to the Lord. And but these guys are it's just as God said. But even though they see it, they don't believe it. They still don't trust what God said, that he was going to take them in there and they would be fine. They're still not trusting in that. And so if you walk by sight, you're never going to be satisfied. Remember Satan told Eve in the garden, what did Satan tell her? If you just taste this fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will see what God doesn't want you to see. You will know, you will see, and you will know what God doesn't want you to know. And it's not a place to be that's prideful, to think that you need to see what God doesn't want you to see. They were full of pride. They wanted to see what God didn't want. And because of that, they became afraid. You will know what God doesn't want you to know. You know, just that's what Satan says. So just the pride. I want to know. That's what Eve said, full of pride. I want to know what God doesn't want me to know. Give me that apple or whatever it was, you know. But when you have small faith, it's because you have a small God. So the people all looked big to them. They said, "Oh my goodness, you know, we're just little doodahs here, and they're so big." Well, they were big people. They were, you know, and so according to your faith, it's going to be done to you, or according to your unbelief, it won't be done for you. And now this unbelief is going to cause all of Israel to complain. Look at verse 30. My little clipper there. No, not one shall come into the land where I swore I would make you dwell, except Caleb and Joshua. But your little ones, who you said would become a prey, that's what they said the Lord was going to do with them, I'm going to bring them in, and they shall know the land that you have rejected. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fail in this wilderness. Your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness, until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness, according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day. You shall bear your iniquity. 34. 34. You shall, verse 34.
She's in the next chapter.
Oh, you're in the next chapter.
She's way over the next.
Oh, I turned an extra page. Pardone. That happens.
We were all lost.
I mean,
I kept trying to
I was just kidding. No. Sorry. Yeah, I turned an extra page.
Chapter 13, verse 30 is where you started.
I've got so many notes that sometimes my pages stick together. I'm sorry. Verse 30 in chapter 13. Thank you for telling me. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it." Good for Caleb. This is how we should be, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people. They're stronger than we are." Doesn't matter. So they brought the people of Israel a bad report, said, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height, and we saw Nephilim, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." So Caleb is bringing he's saying, we can do this. This is God's promise. And the other guys, they start exaggerating what they saw. They're exaggerating to make their point. And in doing so, they're destroying Israel's faith. All 10 of them saw, all 12 of them saw and experienced the same thing, right? All 12 of them, same land, same place, same experience, but only 2 of them responded from their faith, and the others are responding from their feelings. And so it's important to remember that our Christian walk is not by feelings, it's by faith in the Word of God. What we read in the Word of God, what God promises to us, is what we stand on, not how we feel. I feel like this isn't going, or I feel like I'm not right. And God said there's no condemnation if you're a believer.
Obviously, just feeling something isn't right.
If you
If you're walking in the law of the Lord, it can be.
Right, but every time I read something like this, I think, what would I have done? Would I have, because I read it now and I say, well, stupid people, look what God did for you. He took you out of Egypt. He did
but that's
everything
why
for you,
it's
but you
in
won't-
here, so that
Right.
we're not
So
that
what
same-
you do.
that same, God says that's why he puts it in here, so that
Right.
we look and we see and we don't do the same thing. And hopefully, and prayerfully we don't do, but we're not a people of feelings. We don't go by our feelings. We go by the promises of God.
Well, today's society is getting everybody to react only to their feelings.
Yeah.
Not the truth.
Yeah, that's because Satan
Not on
wants you to,
truth,
yeah,
but on your feelings.
Yeah.
Oh, you feel like a man, but you look like a woman, so you
Yeah.
must be a man.
yeah, not by feelings.
Yeah.
That's why,
There is.
yeah. And so let's get into chapter 14. And then all the congregation raised a loud cry. The people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Oh my goodness, the whole congregation.
Bunch of whips.
The whole congregation. Remember, there's about 3 million people, so that's a lot of grumbling and a lot of crying. What that we had died in the land of Egypt, or what would that we had died in this wilderness. So the people cried. They became depressed because of the bad report. But I mean, they're crying for nothing, right? Right? They're crying for nothing. All that stuff that they're all is not even true. It's not even there. And so they're crying for nothing. And now they're wanting and wishing they could die.
They
Put
want
that
to
in your
go
back
to
pocket.
Egypt.
They're wanting to die in the wilderness, or they want to return to slavery in Egypt. I mean, it's like, do you believe God brought you this far, blessed you so far, just to hurt you or leave you in this place? Come on. But they are boo-hoo-hooing because of this report of these 10 people. That's why you need to be strong in the word, because what you hear around you can be devastating. It can devastate you. There's a plague coming. You're gonna die, right? But just stand on God, pray, ask God. Verse 3, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Man, it gets worse as they blame God, and they want to find another leader other than God to take them back to Egypt, back to the world. When God isn't doing your thing, whatever your thing is, and you get to that place where you say, well, God, you're not giving me what I want. I'm happy. I'm not happy. I'm depressed. I'm going to find somebody else, some other way, and I'm going to go back into the world, and I'm going to do the worldly thing. And that's where these people are. And they want to go back to a place that God had devastated it right before that. Remember, they had frogs and lice and things and stuff, and he had zapped things, and the people are all mourning over their firstborn being like they're really going to want the Israelites back, right? They'd be all shooting them. No, stay away. We're so it's kind of a stupid place to want to go anyway. And but they're just going from unbelief to like complete insanity. Think about what you're saying. You want to go back to this place where there's like all this stuff going on.
Back to getting beat.
Yeah.
And being slaves.
Yeah.
And enslaved.
And the people are going to hate you all the more. But it's just like now they've gone from just complaining to being afraid to being pretty much insane over whatever they're saying. I see that in the world today. I see people going from being deceived, being talked to, being deceived, getting into a thing there's something going on, to they're just nuts. They become insane. And verse 5, then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. Verse 6, and Joshua and Caleb, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. They tore their clothes when someone died, but Joshua and Caleb, they can see the people dying because of their unbelief. And like with Satan, this is a sin of rebellion. Do you get that they're rebelling against what God commanded them to do? They're rebelling against the promise that God gave them. So this is a sin of rebellion, and God just dealt with Satan's rebellion, right? He does not like rebellion, to put it mildly. But this is a sin of rebellion. And
Verse 8. Is that verse 8?
verse 6, 5 and 6. They tore their clothes. And that's what they did when someone was going to die, is they would tear their clothes. And Joshua and Caleb are the ones that are tearing their clothes because they can see that their people, these guys they're headed for death because they're rebelling. And they're challenging God's authority, and it's going to lead to death. Verse 7, and said to all the congregation, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. Verse 8, if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land. He will give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Verse 9, only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land. They are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Don't fear them. So did you get that? Their protection is removed from them, whatever protection they had. It was worldly protection, shields and armies and stuff, right? But God is removing their protection, and he's with you. When you walk into a situation, he removes the other protection from them. And they tell the people not to fear. They tell the people, don't listen to these 10 men. They've made you terrified. You don't fear these people in the land. God's going to take care of them. But you can't reason with rebellion. And you can't. You look at the people today that are running in stores, and they just tear up all this stuff, and right in front of everybody just stands there and looks at them. And what do? You can't reason with rebellion, and they're actually rebelling against the Lord today, and everything that he says not to do and who he is. And that's what they were doing. And then in verse 10, then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. You know, when you try to stand up for the truth in the midst of all that rebellion over there, and you try and stand and talk reason, they want to kill you, right? And so the people respond by wanting to kill them because of the Lord. And God has had enough.
Yeah.
God has had enough. The Lord says, how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me, in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? The Lord talks to Moses. The Lord's not talking to the people.
Oh, the previous, you didn't read, says, then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. What was that about?
Well, the God's had enough, and so he
appeared to all those disbelieving people.
He appeared. His glory is, remember, his glory is in the tabernacle, right?
Yeah,
when the tabernacle's there, you can see it, and all the people were camped around, and they could see the glory of the Lord. They couldn't go near it. They couldn't go in. Only the priests and Moses could, but they can definitely see it.
Are
And-
we talking about maybe just seeing light?
The glory of the Lord, Shekinah
Maybe,
glory,
glory.
yeah, whatever it looked like, it was definitely a bright appearance of, and but they want to kill. They are ready to kill Moses, so God's going to show up, you know,
Stone Joshua
and Caleb and Moses. They want to kill them all, and
just in time.
yeah. And in verse 11, the Lord says to Moses, you know, how long are they going to be like this? I've done all these signs, I've done all these wonders. So he speaks to Moses. He's not speaking to the people, even though his Shekinah glory is there. And he says, after all these miracles, after all these blessings, they're still not going to believe. And like Satan, they're actually calling God a liar in their rebellion. They're calling God a liar.
Right. You said you'd bring us, but you're not gonna, so we're going back to Egypt.
Yeah, in their unbelief, in your unbelief and my unbelief, I call God a liar. If God's promised something and I'm in unbelief with it, I'm actually calling him a liar. You said you promised you know, but I don't believe you. So that means you're lying about it. They're calling him a liar. Verse 12, God says, I'm going to strike them with pestilence, disinherit them. And he tells Moses, I'm going to make of you a nation greater, mightier. Boy, is that a test for Moses or what? You know, God says he's going to disinherit the Israelites and he's going to give all this to Moses. And I mean, Moses gets God's ready to kill them all, right? He's had it with them. But Moses, verse 13, says to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear about it. You brought this people up in your might from among them, and they're going to tell the inhabitants of this land that they have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of the people. For you, O Lord, verse 14, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Verse 15, if you kill this people as one man, then the nations who have heard your fame will say, verse 16, it is because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to give to them, that he has killed them in the wilderness. And so Moses declines God's offer, and he thinks more about the people. He thinks more about God's glory and God's name than he does himself. But it's important to understand verse 6. When we mess up and God has to discipline us in verse 16, people look on and say it's because we give God a bad report. They say it's because God doesn't really save. God's not really cool. God's not really great, because obviously you don't want to do whatever it is, you know, that he's asking you to do. You want to do something else. So we give God a bad report. And we need to be careful of our witness. And verse 17, now please let the power of the Lord be great as you have promised. This is Moses speaking.
Moses must have taken some psychology courses, and
Yeah.
because
He's reasoning. with
Moses
God.
was with the Lord 40 years in the desert, and it was just him and God was working on him all that time. And
he was thinking of God's reputation
yeah,
than he was of the people.
yeah. And I mean, look at all the miracles that God had him do, and how he knows the power and the might of the Lord. He, you know, I
But
mean,
it's
he's
almost like
experienced
he's trying-
everything.
He's trying to talk God out of doing something.
He is. He's
Yeah.
got a heart.
But it's because of his respect for God and his reputation, God's
Yeah.
reputation.
Yeah, he's got a heart for the people, and he knows God is slow to anger, verse 18, abounding in steadfast love, forgiven iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. So please pardon the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your steadfast love, which is your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt until now. So he knows God's merciful. He knows he's forgiving. He also knows that there's consequences to sin, and it's going to affect their children, be visited upon them, as it were. But God allows that so that God can pardon them. You know, our life, when we're in rebellion to the Lord before we're saved, and sometimes during our salvation when we're in rebellion to the Lord, it has consequences. And a lot of times, like in my family, it affected my kids. and in a bad way. And so that my sin was visited upon them, not, but God allows that because he can pardon my son, he can pardon my daughter-in-law, he can pardon them, forgive them of their sin, and bring them into the land. But yeah, consequences of sin. But he is praying to God because of who God is. And so no matter how bad our sin is, it can't change how good God is. That's I've heard that for many years. No matter how bad your sin is, it can't change how good God is. And that's so true. And it's not a generational curse. That's, if you ever hear somebody talk about generational curses, that's where they get this from. Yeah, that's kind of where they get this from. That's not what it is. This isn't talking about a generational curse. It's talking about consequences of sin is what it's talking
But we
about.
have a big responsibility
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to live the way God wants.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If I would have known the Lord when I was young, when my kids were born,
Yes.
things would have been much different for them
Yeah.
as well as for myself. But in God and his grace and his mercy allows me to pray for them and know that, they can be saved. They can be saved. And so verse 20, the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. Wow. Wow. That just hit me. Yeah, hit me. I mean, I have pardoned them according to your word, Moses. So they were pardoned because Moses prayed. Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes. I pardoned them
I mean,
as
God
you
knew
requested.
God knew Moses would pray. You know that. God
Right.
already knew Moses was going to pray for them, right?
Yes.
But Moses didn't know he was going to pray for them. Does that make sense?
Mhm. God knows everything.
And so they were pardoned because God already knew that Moses would pray for them and that he would pardon them after Moses prayed. And so he could, there's always this thing that we don't comprehend because we're on this kind of a time, but God's outside of time and he already knows all things. And so it's pretty cool to know how he does this. But just showing the mercy of God through prayer to the people, man. But God is just and fair. He says in 21, as I live and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, 10 men, 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. None of those who despised me shall see it. So 10 men testing God 10 times, not going into the promised land. They wouldn't have survived in the promised land anyway because they have no faith. And once they get into the promised land, it takes a lot of faith. They still have to obey, right? They still have to follow. So they probably wouldn't have made it in there anyway. But if they would have gone to the promised land with their unbelief, they probably would have caused a lot more failures in the nation of Israel, right? When you see people that are in unbelief, people that are always complaining, people that are always, and nothing satisfies them because they look at everything by sight instead of faith, they will bring so many people down with them. That's what Satan did. But they'll bring so many people down with them, and you want to stay away from that. But God deals with it. And in verse 24, we see Caleb's heart. Man, he's fully devoted to the Lord. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and he's followed me fully, I'm going to bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. Verse 25. Now, since the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valleys, turn tomorrow, set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. You're going to start on your 40-year journey. Verse 26, the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, how long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? I have heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. You go and tell them, as I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing, I'm going to do for you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness. And of all your number listed in the census, from 20 years old and up, who have grumbled against me, not one of them is going to come into the land that I swore I would make you dwell, except Caleb and Joshua. Verse 31, but your little ones, who you said would become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know that the land you have rejected, they shall know the land you have rejected. 32, but as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness. According to the number of days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day, you shall bear your iniquity. 40 years, know my displeasure. Whoa. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do to this wicked congregation who are gathered together against me in this wilderness. They shall come to a full end, and there they shall die. And we know that they do. They get what they complained about, didn't they? They get what they asked for. Oh, that we would have just died in the wilderness or gone back to Egypt. So God said, you said it, you want it, here you go. And God says, okay. So I'm giving you the desire of your heart. 20 years old and up. They're going to wander in the wilderness until they die. And it's you. God says it's you. It's your sin. It's your choice that's going to cause your kids to suffer, and they're going to be shepherds in the wilderness. But they're going to go into the promised land. And because they weren't part of the rebellion, they're kids, right? And we always say the age of accountability. And I've struggled with that a little bit, the age of accountability, but I believe each child is a little bit different. God says 20 years old and up here. It's a good place to kind of get an idea of what he considers age of accountability. I think today each child is a little different. Some know right and wrong at this age, others know right and wrong at that age. And I know that God knows the heart and he knows the mind and where everything is at. And I think that's what he looks at, and, but there is an age of accountability. And so here it's interesting, verse 30. In verse 30, God prophetically doesn't mention Moses going into the promised land. He says Caleb and Joshua are going to go in. He doesn't say anything about Moses going in, does he? And this hasn't happened yet. Moses doesn't know yet that he's not going in. So it's just a little prophetic. God knows what's going to happen. And then in 36, the men whom Moses went to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing up a bad report. The men who brought up a bad report died by plague before the Lord. Of those men who went to spy out the land, only Joshua and Caleb remained alive. Just of those 12, those guys, God struck them down for leading Israel astray, just like they were like Satan to Israel. And then verse 39, when Moses told these words to all the people of Israel, now they mourned again. And they rose early in the morning, and they went up to the heights of the hill country, saying, here we are, we will go up to the place that the Lord has promised, for we have sinned.
So they're saying they're going.
To change your mind.
They've already had judgment pronounced on them here, and now they're disobeying the Lord again. At least they would get time to wander through the desert, and they could even repent, maybe. But they're like, no, we're gonna go, right? And it's basically a day late and a dollar short. That's what we would say. You're a day late and a dollar short. Should have done it before. Judgment's been passed on you. Now you're gonna wander in the desert. That's God's judgment. But they're saying, no, we're gonna do what, and God kills them right there. And yeah, because they disobeyed him again. They could have had some more years, but they're trying to go into the promised land anyway. And then in verse 41, but Moses said, why are you now transgressing the command of the Lord? That's not going to succeed. Don't go up. The Lord's not among you. You're going to be struck down. There's Amalekites and Canaanites that are going to come after you. You're going to fall by the sword. But because you have turned back from following the Lord's not with you. But verse 44, they presume to go up to the heights of the hill country, although neither the ark of the Lord nor Moses left the camp. No, God wasn't with them. And then the Amalekites and the Canaanites defeated them and killed them. And they won't succeed. Go anyway. They were defeated. And so they had sealed their fate. It was too late. They had sealed their fate. And there is a place where you can, in rejection, seal your fate. And God just says, that's it. Done. Told you. I had mercy on you. And, no matter what I tell you, it's like God says, no matter what I tell you, you're going to do the absolute opposite and reject everything that I say. And for them, it was too late. And chapter 15, verses 1 through 5, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land you are to inhabit, which I am giving you. There's a promise right off the get-go for these people now, the new people, right? Not the ones that are wandering in the wilderness. This is the new generation. And he gives them a promise. And I thought about the rainbow, just like when he destroyed the earth with the flood. And then he put a rainbow and said, I'm not going to do that again. And now he's telling them when you come into the promised land. So he's giving them a promise. Israel had just been sentenced to wander in the wilderness until only the new generation is left to go into the promised land. So now they're going to receive God's mercy. They're going to get care, and God's going to put his laws back in their heart because they were just kids. They were little ones. So he's telling them again, and he's going to teach this new generation. He's going to teach them how to sacrifice in the promised land. He's going to teach them how to do offerings to cover sin. He's going to teach them how to express gratitude in their Thanksgiving offerings. And it's just, this whole thing is just showing us that we need to teach our kids. God was very specific to stop and reteach these kids what needed to be done, because obviously the other generation didn't do a good job. And then in verses 6, he's talking about a ram, offering a ram for a grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/3 of hin of oil. And the drink offering, you're going to offer 1/3 of a hin of wine, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So once they're in the promised land, the offering of a ram was, he wants them to include this grain offering of flour, oil, and wine. And he wants it done the way he commands it, and he wants it done exactly as he said, because when they do, it's a sweet aroma to the Lord. And I love it. When we obey the Lord, when we do what the Lord tells us to do and we obey him the way he tells us to, it's a sweet aroma to the Lord. I've sent up some sweet aromas to the Lord, and I'm sure so many times he holds his nose. That's not what I wanted, Trish. That's not what I wanted. That does not smell good. Go away. I just think about that. In verse 8, offering a bull to fulfill a vow or for a peace offering, offer it with a grain offering, and the same thing, the ephah of fine flour and oil, and offering the drink offering of wine as a food, again, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So this offering of a bull made to fulfill a vow or as a peace offering includes a grain offering. That's the one that you wave like a cross in front of the Lord. And so everyone here who makes a sacrifice had to bring it. They had to bring it with a thanksgiving, which is grain, and joy, which was wine. God wanted Israel to serve him with gladness, you know, free will, joy offering, with the wine. And again, it reiterates in verse, where is it? Verse 16, 15, a statute forever. All these sacrifices, you and the stranger shall be alike before the Lord. One law, one rule. Verse 16, for you and for the stranger. So when God died, he died for everyone. One law, one God, one sacrifice for all. So again, picture of Jesus Christ's work on the cross. And then the Lord is speaking to Moses again. He says in verse 18, when you come into the land to which I bring you, when you eat of the bread. What a great promise. You will, you will, you will, as he talks. In verse 22, but if you sin unintentionally and do not observe all these commandments that the Lord has spoken to Moses, from the day that the Lord gave the commandment and onward throughout all your generations, if it was done unintentionally, without the knowledge of the congregation, then all the congregation is going to offer one bull from the herd offering with its grain, and the priest shall make atonement for all the congregation. They shall be forgiven because it was a mistake, and they have brought. So this is a national. This is the whole congregation. This is the whole nation doing something unintentional, that atonement has to be made for the whole nation. Sometimes I think of it for our family, when our family does something unintentional, but we sin against the Lord as a family. We have to make atonement, come together as a family and make atonement. You know, if you have kids and if you're like mom and dad and you have kids, and but as a congregation, Lord, for I can see pastors saying, Lord, forgive us because we, whatever it was, but they have to make atonement for the whole congregation. And then he says, and then it's for one person in verse 27.
Trish, is that Moses and Aaron has to make the atonement?
The priest has to make the atonement.
The priest, okay.
The priest. Whoever, so it would be Aaron at the time, was the high priest. The priest makes an atonement for the whole congregation, and they shall be forgiven, because it was a mistake. And
but the whole community presented a bull, so take to him.
the whole
The whole community presented the sacrificial offering, and then Moses or Aaron was the one that.
Yeah, it says all the congregation shall offer one bull from the herd and for burnt offering,
That way they don't get off free.
with a grain offering, and one male goat for the sin offering. And the priest makes the atonement for the whole congregation. They shall be forgiven because it was a mistake. And they've brought their offering to the Lord, and the congregation of the people of Israel shall be forgiven along with the stranger, because the whole population was involved in the mistake. Wow.
What do you think an unintentional sin would be?
You can do well. You have to think back then, though, because with all the sacrifices and with the new, now these laws and sacrifices are all new to the people as God is laying them down. After years and years of doing this, they got it, but he has laid all this out. And I can imagine you bring the wrong sacrifice, or you don't do it on the right day, or you were supposed to bring the first of your fruits and you ate that, but because, and you like, oh, I didn't know that, I forgot, or I didn't mean to do that way. This is all in their time and in their lifestyle. So, touching a dead body unintentionally, you could do that. If the whole of Israel, and I was trying to think actually through when Israel did as a congregation have to be made atonement for, and I think we'll come across that. And so I was going to kind of like put this in my back pocket so that I could remember when we got there to say, this is an example of the whole atonement. And I think we're going to run across that. And then he goes down in 27 and talks about one person, and the same thing, unintentional. You're forgiven, but just because you didn't mean to sin doesn't mean it's not a sin, right? Just because you didn't mean to do it.
The whole group has said, well, we've always done it this way.
We've always done it this way. Yeah. Hey, I mean, you know, what if the sign says go 65 miles an hour, and if you're like me and you're going 70, is that unintentional or intentional? You know, if I get busted, if I get busted by the cops, you know, is that
I didn't know I was going there.
you know, but I might have accidentally been doing 80, you know, because sometimes how you're talking and you're going, and then you look and you go, oh my gosh, you know, and you take,
Yeah.
that could be unintentional, right?
Right.
Yeah, I knew I was going 70 pounds, but 80?
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, verse 30, the person who does anything with a high hand, native or stranger, reviles the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from among his people because he has despised the word of the Lord, broken his commandment. That person shall be utterly cut off, and his iniquity shall be on him. So this is speaking of an open, unashamed rebellion against God, the law, the nation. This person is not feeling any guilt, so no sacrifice is going to work because he doesn't feel remorse. And if you sin and you don't care, there's no sacrifice for you. There's no atonement for you. There's no forgiveness for you, even in Jesus at the moment, because you're not asking, because you don't care. And that's what he's talking about there. He's going to have to bear his own sin. And verse 32, while the people of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation, put him in custody. They weren't sure what to do with him, and the Lord said, the man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. And all the congregation brought him outside the camp, stoned him to death with stones, as the Lord commanded. I mean, God will immediately deal with someone who sins willfully, because all Israel knew the Sabbath law. They all knew. That was, matter of fact, that was one of the most top important laws that God had put down, is the Sabbath law, because it is about Jesus Christ. And because it's about Jesus Christ, he is our Sabbath rest every day. Because it was about Jesus, if you sinned against the Sabbath, and we'll see that all the way through the Bible, take him outside and shoot him. He was defiant towards God, and it was just Israel's responsibility before the Lord to make sure that they as a nation followed the Lord. And then in verse 37, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel, tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. It shall be a tassel for you to look at. Remember all the commandments of the Lord, do them, not to follow after your own heart or your own eyes, which you are inclined to do. That's an important verse. Not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes. Remember to obey the Lord, to be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the world to be your God. I am the Lord your God. He brought us out of the world. There is a picture here, and I thought it was interesting. This is the idea of what a tassel looks like, and I happened to pull that one up where it said the lady touched with the issue of
I
blood.
have the Jewish prayer cloth.
Mhm.
I should have brought it. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, it has the
But
tassels.
it has the
Mhm.
tassels.
But it's a cord of blue, and that would be what when she touched his.
Trish, I'm gonna go back to this one
Mhm.
about when the Lord tells him to stone this person.
Mhm.
That seems out of character for the Lord.
Mm-mm.
I
He
mean,
is.
I know he's gonna punish, but that seems like, that didn't seem right to me.
This is
Like
someone.
gathering wood.
Huh?
He was gathering wood. I understand what you're saying. It seems
Yeah.
No,
like
but
it
this was willful disobedience to a command of the Lord about the Sabbath, which is representative of Jesus Christ's finished work on the cross.
Well, I know that
And
I know that that was necessary to do,
Yes.
but this particular thing,
Yes.
stoning,
Mhm.
telling everybody to come out and stone.
Mhm. Yeah, it was Israel's responsibility to keep the Sabbath. It was Israel's responsibility to point to Jesus Christ's finished work on the cross. You all through the Bible, the Sabbath was one of the most important things that God put forward. And this guy, you have to understand, this person was in absolute rebellion. I'm not going to pay attention. I'm not going. Anybody today that is in rebellion against Jesus Christ, at the end of the day, is put to death.
Well, I know they should be punished or what.
No, today you go to hell if you don't, if you reject Jesus
But
Christ.
I know
That's what
that-
he was doing.
that he sinned, but it's my whole point is, to me, that's so cruel to stone somebody. I know you have to. I mean, he does do this, but it just seems like that's just.
But it's
They
a-
didn't put him in electric chair
put it
today,
this
but
way.
Now they just give him a.
Think of it this way. This is hell. This is hell. You reject Jesus Christ and his work on the cross, you go to hell. If you think that that's unfair or unjust, that is what he's saying here.
Yeah.
It's the same difference. That to stone you, you're going to die because you reject
Well, I
Jesus
understand
Christ.
that,
So it's a
yeah.
picture of today of hell, of rejecting Jesus Christ and going to hell.
Right.
You reject him, yes, you're going to die, you're going to go to hell.
Yeah, well, I
Period.
understand.
Yeah.
that part.
And so this is what he's talking about here. It's like the same picture of, because the Sabbath is a picture of Christ.
Right.
And so he wants to make sure that we get, and Israel gets, you don't play with the Sabbath and you don't play with Jesus. You reject the Sabbath, you
Look at
reject
the
Jesus.
destruction right now of the United States, because they did not, they decided to move God out of everything,
Mm-hmm.
out of the schools and everything,
Mhm.
so they say their end is here.
Another way,
Yeah.
is what I'm
Unless
saying.
they repent.
Dead is dead, though.
But
Dead is dead.
was the
way that they did it in those days.
yeah,
Yeah.
stoning was
They could've hung
was
them.
how they did.
Yeah,
No,
they didn't do
stoning
that,
was
though.
what
No.
they did at
Yeah.
that time. That was their
No,
mode
they
of
crucified.
some of them. And but here we have the tassels. Well,
He could have just gone like that and got rid of gone, but that wasn't.
but do you understand? No, because when you stone someone, every single person of the congregation picks up a stone, and it is part of, so
You say you're guilty.
it's realizing that God, this is such a sin in God's eyes, that you are partaking. You are saying, yes, Lord, we get it. I get it. This is bad. Don't do it. This points to, it's all about. And so you pick up the stone and throw it, just like he asked the tribe of Levi to go and kill the 3,000 that didn't step over the line. God's holy. God doesn't play. He doesn't mess with certain things. He's got a lot of love and mercy and long suffering. But when it comes to Jesus Christ, he does not. That reject Jesus Christ and you're dead. That's the short of it. You're not saved. You go to hell, and it's just another picture of that. But here they've got these tassels that, as you looked at, to remind Israel that to whom they belonged. And it had blue through it. The Ark of the Covenant had blue cloth over it, and it's just a whole reminder of who they were. And let's go to chapter 16. Now Korah, the son of Izar, son of Kohath. Korah, if you remember in your little chart, of the Levi, the tribe of Levi. Levi, he had sons, right? 3 sons, Korah and Merari, and I forget who the other one was. Help me out. But anyway, Korah, they each had service to the Lord, right? Korah was the one that God said they were gonna carry all the holy things, right? They were Levites. They were in charge of, after Aaron and his sons covered up the ark and all that stuff. They were the ones that were going to carry, and so they're blessed by God. That's a big deal, man. They get to carry the holy stuff, and they get to be in front of the Lord and all, and that's a big deal. And but Korah comes along here, and he's collected this group of men, and he's going to come against Moses. He's got 250 guys on his side, and they're going to come up against Moses. And in verse 3, Korah is telling Moses, here we go again, do you think you're better than we are? Like, we're all holy, and he's trying to bring Moses down. He's trying to exalt himself.
Yeah, pride got in the way there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in verse 4, Moses hears it, and what does he do? He falls on his face before the Lord. And he's not weak, man. It takes a really strong, great person not to confront Korah. But he seeks God first, and then he responds to Korah. Before responding to Korah in anger, because you would be mad. You would be really, really mad to where you'd want to. And Moses was strong to where you'd want to knock him out. And so he goes to the Lord, and Korah here is just rebelling against God. He knows that. And then in verse 5, he says to Korah and all his company, in the morning, the Lord's going to show who is holy, and he will bring him near to him. And the one whom he chooses, speaking of God, he will bring near to him. And he says, do this, take these censers, Korah, and all the guys that are with you, and put fire in them and put incense on them before the Lord tomorrow. So the Lord's going to settle this. After speaking with the Lord, he understands God's going to decide. He went to prayer. He knows God's going to decide, because again, rebellion is serious. Rebelling or speaking against what God is doing is like Satan. This is serious to the Lord. And he says only the priest was supposed to have a censer. But Korah wants to be a priest. He's telling, and he wants to be a leader. Who made you in charge? Who do you think you are? I should be a priest. We want to do this. We want to, he's not content with what God blessed him with. He wants to do this. And so God says, okay. And nobody could touch the fire, the holy fire, except the priest too, and the incense. But since Korah wants to be a priest and wants to do what priests do, God says, okay, go ahead. Get the censers, put fire in them, and bring them before the Lord. And I'll choose. I'll let you know. And so in verse 8, here we have Moses telling Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi, is it too small a thing for you that God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself? I mean, he's telling the Levites about all the blessings that God has given them and how he's allowed them to come near to him, how he's allowed them to minister to the people. And now you want to be high priest instead of Aaron. And now you want to lead the people instead of me. And he's going, dude, you're rebelling against the Lord because the Lord set this up. And you are rebelling against what the Lord said. And so in verse 12, Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. These guys are part of it. They don't want to come, right? So, because the Lord said, get all this stuff and bring it in front of me. And so Moses calls these two guys, Dathan and Abiram, and they said, we're not going to come up. And in verse 13, is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey? Check out what they say. Is it a small thing, Moses, that you have brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey? They're talking about Egypt, right? And that you haven't given us an inheritance of fields, Remember, the Lord is their inheritance. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. Man, I mean, they won't meet with Moses. They're describing Egypt flowing with milk and honey. They're accusing Moses of taking them out and killing them. And they kind of remind Moses of when he was a prince in Egypt, how he went out and killed that guy, and then looked around and didn't see anybody. They're kind of rubbing it in his face. And then in verse 15, Moses is mad. He's mad. And he says to the Lord, don't respect their offerings. I have not taken one donkey from them. I have not harmed one of them. And so Moses has this righteous anger, and he's actually talking to the Lord about it. Don't do anything for these guys. They're going to come and offer a sacrifice. And he tells Korah and the guys that are with him to go now before the Lord. And then in verse 18, all 250 and with their censers. And then in verse 18, every man took his censer and put fire in them and laid the incense on them and stood at the entrance of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And so God tells Moses and Aaron here to get out of the way, because he's going to consume these guys, right? The Lord said, separate yourselves from among this congregation in verse 21, that I may consume them in a moment. And in 22, they fell on their faces again. They, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin? And will you be angry with all the congregation? And the Lord said to Moses, say to the congregation, get away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. So first there he was going to knock them all out, right? But Moses prayed and Aaron prayed, and God relents from destroying the whole congregation because of Moses's prayer. Man, they should be so thankful to Moses. But they get away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abram. These are the leaders of the guys that were against God, the insurrectionists. Yeah, and at the door of their tents, together with their wives, their sons, and their kids. And Moses said, hereby you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works. If these men die a natural death, if they're visited by the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. Verse 30, but if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, then they're going to go down alive into the grave, and you shall know that these men have despised the Lord. So, man, if God does this, you're going to know who's in charge, right? It's me. And if he doesn't do it, hey, I'm out of here. I'm not in charge. And he prayed, so he knows what God's going to do. And then in verse 31, as soon as he finished speaking, the ground opens up, and it swallows swallows those leaders who were against the Lord and their family. And they all that belonged to them went down into the grave, and the earth closed over them. In verse 34, all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, and they said, lest the earth swallow us up. And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering the incense. Man, so justice is served. That's true justice. They got what they deserved. And then they beat the censers in verse 36. They take these 250 censers and they beat them into one piece, and they use them to cover the main altar of sacrifice. They're still holy to the Lord, even though they were used for the wrong thing. They're still holy to the Lord. All 250 of them were used. God did not use one of them. To go along with someone in their sin, even if you don't agree, is to be a part of the sin. So God allows the leaders and these guys that were with them got, right? God killed them all. And it just shows you, if you think, God says if we're part of it, if we're going along with it, we're part of it. If you go along with the sin, you're part of the sin. And you have to suffer the consequences like these guys did. And then Verse 41, on the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You've killed the people of the Lord." Oh my goodness. So now Moses has to deal with those sympathizers to these devices.
Like Aaron could open the ground.
Yeah, like
Right,
Moses and Aaron
yeah.
can just go, yeah, right, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, God destroyed him, but
Bring down fire on them.
Yeah.
yeah, here's these people, they're feeling sorry, man. You killed all these people, you know, and they're feeling sorry for him.
Boots and staying away from everybody.
But that's a slap in the face of God's judgment. God did it. God judged it, and they're saying, and God, that's a slap in God's face. So they're saying, God, you're not, you weren't just, you weren't fair. And so, verse 42, the congregation assembled against Moses, and they turned towards the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered. God's down there again. And Moses and Aaron come to the tent, and the Lord speaks to Moses, and he tells him again, get away from the midst of this congregation. I'm going to consume them in a moment. They fall on their faces. Now again,
A lot of time on their face.
yeah. Hey, Shekinah glory of God appears. Now he's got to defend Moses and Aaron, and he's ready to judge the people. Moses and Aaron. Pray to God. I mean, Aaron's kind of catching Moses's heart there, as you see now Aaron's on his face along with Moses, right? And Moses tells Aaron here in verse 46 to act quickly. God's ready to consume the people. But Moses, I kept praying, God, give me a heart like Moses for everybody around me, because Moses, they wanted to kill him. And God, Moses and Aaron fall on their face and say, Lord, and then he says, get the censer quick. God wants to kill him. Get the censer, put the holy fire in it, the right stuff, put the incense in it, and run through the crowd, because God's sending a plague. And so Aaron grabs it. He's the high priest, runs through the crowd, and he's praying and swinging the censer and everything as he goes through. And the people that he is praying over as he's running through the midst of 3 million people, they're okay. They don't die. But I think how many?
14,700.
14,700 do die.
Was that like a
And-
plague of,
That's
of
like our-
Yeah, God
killer,
sent.
killer
That's like
bees
our
or an
COVID
illness or
going
what?
on.
It
kind?
doesn't say. It just says God sent a plague. But here Moses and Aaron intercede and save them. Check this out. The high priest intercedes, and because they've been judged, and saves them while they were yet in their sin. Does that sound familiar?
Mhm.
It's a picture of Christ.
Yep. He intercedes to save them. They're still in their sin. They haven't repented. And where Aaron prayed for their forgiveness, the plague stopped. Power of prayer between life and death. But 14,700 of this unbelieving generation went. And then 17, the Lord speaks to Moses, say to the people of Israel, get from them the staffs, one for each of the father's house. So here's 17 is where each of the leaders of each of the tribes now brings their staff. These are staffs. These are like the walking sticks that y'all carry around when you go hiking. They're dead wood. They have nothing growing on them. They've been dead wood for a long time, but they each are supposed to bring one. And Aaron brings one as well. And they're going to take them into the tent of meeting. And God is going to, through these staffs, make very, very sure for the last time that they understand who is in charge. Good heavens. And so the blooms on the dead wood would be a miracle for sure. Just fruitfulness. But after making his leadership plain, Aaron's leadership and Moses's leadership, he's not going to put up with any more complaining. He's not going to put up with any more gossiping and slandering. He's going to judge quickly, and he's going to rid himself of their murmurings. And so he does this. Aaron's staff is the one that not only sprouts, it buds. It not only buds, but it produces almonds. It produces fruit. All of that is a miracle. This is dead wood. All of that in itself is a mighty, mighty miracle that shows who God is choosing. He's giving proof of Aaron's leadership to the people. Not because Aaron's the most godly man. We know his background. We know what he did. But it's God's choice. And he wants them to bear fruit. He wants Aaron to bear fruit. That's the whole idea of our salvation. We are to bear fruit. And he says, Aaron's my man. So the rod, actually, Aaron's rod was to remind Israel that God had chosen a priesthood. It was to be kept forever. Aaron and Aaron's descendants. And just an example too, it's kept in the ark as a reminder of all their rebellion, all their failures and all their rebellions. He keeps that in there. Remember, you wanted what I didn't give you, and this is what I'm giving you, and it's a reminder that you rebelled against me. Don't do it again. God's mercy,
So
authority, and
Trish,
judgment. He could have wiped them all out.
did it just bear fruit one time and to show them all, or did it continue?
No, it looks like it just budded and bared fruit that one time, but it seemed to have stayed that way because they placed it in the ark as a reminder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
that's what I was wondering.
when they open the ark, or when they, if they in the ark, that it would have been a budded, dead piece of wood that was budded, because they were supposed to bud and bring forth fruit as a nation. That's what God wanted from them. And then chapter 18, here we see the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons and your father's house with you shall bear iniquity, connected with the sanctuary, and you and your sons with you shall bear iniquity, connected with your priesthood. So when you bring your brothers, the tribe of Levi, that they may join you and minister to you while you and your sons with you are before the tent of the testimony. Verse 3, they shall keep guard over you and over the whole tent, but shall not come near to the vessels of the sanctuary or to the altar, lest you die. So God just reconfirmed Aaron's priesthood, and now comes the responsibility of Aaron having this priesthood. So he talks to Aaron directly, lets him know he's going to be held in a higher standard, as are all priests and pastors, leaders, teachers. You bear the responsibility of the position you're in. You bear the iniquities of the people that you are responsible for. And it's only Aaron's family and their descendants. That's it. Those are the ones that are going to be priests.
Do they still follow that today?
No, because they have no record of any descendants anymore. It was all wiped out.
Mhm.
So they have to figure that out for the temple. I think they are trying to figure out who is for the temple that the Antichrist is going to be in. Yeah, they have to figure out who's going to be their priests, and interesting stuff. But it's in verse 4 and 5, keep guard over the sanctuary and all, that there may never again be wrath on the people. I mean, God doesn't want the people to disobey. He doesn't want to discipline them. Same with us. He loves us. And then in 6 and 7, I have taken your brothers, the Levites, from among the people. They are a gift to you, given to the Lord to do the service of the tent of meetings. So the Levites have been gifted by God. They have been gifted by God to be a gift from God to serve. Each one serves in his special place. Same for us. We all have different gifts. You know that each one of us has at least one gift. Some have more, but they're each different, but they all work together in unison, just like he's talking about this. Who's got 1 Corinthians?
1 Corinthians 12, 4 through 6. Now, there are a variety of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who empowers them all in everyone.
Right, so all through this, as he's showing, as Korah got upset because he wanted to be the high priest, and he's saying, you know, we all have gifts. I gave you this, you weren't content with it, you wanted to be this. Same for us. We all have gifts. Whatever your gift is, use your gift. Don't try and do somebody else's gift. Find out what your gift is, or gifts, if you with an S, and use them to serve the Lord. That's what he blessed you with. That's what he gave you. And if you don't know what they are, pray about them. And then in verse 8, here God is letting Aaron and his sons know that they're going to be provided for from the offerings they receive. The Israelites bring the offerings into the tabernacle, and they offer it to the Lord, and then they eat the rest. That is, you know, what they have. They don't have any inheritance of land or anything. And then in verse 11, he says, this also is yours, the contribution of their gift, the wave offerings. I have given them to you and to your sons and your daughters with you as a perpetual due. And so here he's talking about the fact that we're to give the best and the first to the Lord, right? Your tithes should be it's off the top, and it's the best to the Lord because he gave his best for us. So the best that the people have given to the Lord gives it to the priests, except the firstborn males, who, as you know, the Levites are a substitute for them, and the extra ones are redeemed for 5 shekels from the Lord. And then in verse 19, God makes this covenant of salt. All the holy contributions that the people of Israel present to the Lord, I give you and to your sons and daughters as a perpetual due. It's a covenant of salt. And we know that salt is preserving, it's pure, it never changes, and that's why God calls it a covenant of salt throughout your generations. And
Okay, when you say, when you see the salt covenant on people's backs of their car nowadays, what is that referring to?
I have not seen that, but it would it is probably talking about Jesus Christ, because it's the same. It's a salt
Well, I
covenant.
figured
It's
it was
unchanging.
somehow connected with Jesus.
Yeah,
Christ,
it would be
right?
unchanging, pure, forever, perpetual, not broken. And so you can consider the new covenant with Christ a salt covenant, because it never ever will change.
Because I know I did flowers for a wedding where they took a salt covenant oath to the Lord in the wedding.
Ooh, that's
Dangerous.
That's
is the
what
way I
my
look at it.
yeah.
But
That's
they did. That's something they wanted to do, and I thought, oh, let's hope you never disobey that.
yeah. You never want to break up or get divorced. Because the
Yeah.
salt is forever. It's pure. It's lasting. And it's a
It's an
salt
agreement,
covenant. That's
too.
why God uses
Agreement.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know, the Levites, they're not given any land, right? The Lord is their inheritance. And so the Lord's going to take care of them. He lets them know that they can live on the tithes and offerings. That's their pay. They're working for the Lord. You never owe anything to the Lord. When you work for the Lord takes care of you. And he lets them know. And then in 25, actually all the way down to 32, the Lord spoke to Moses, moreover, speak to the Levites, when you take from the people of Israel the tithe that I have given you from them for your inheritance, you shall present a contribution from it to the Lord, a tithe of the tithe. So what's he saying in these last verses is God lets the priests, pastors for today, he lets them know that just because I'm providing for you, just because you work in the temple, or just because you work in the church, meaning a pastor, and I pay you, basically, you still have to tithe. You're not exempt. You're the same. They were to tithe the best. They got the best, and from the best that they got, they were to tithe. Pastors are to tithe. Workers in the church are to tithe. They are not exempt from tithing, even though their salary comes from the church. They have to tithe back out of their salary right off the top. They are no different than anybody else. So, we're commanded to tithe. We are commanded to tithe. And if you don't tithe, if you don't have a fellowship that you tithe to, find one and tithe. That's all I can say. Find where you give your 10% a month to something as a tithe, because we are commanded to tithe. And they are allowed to eat the rest of the food, and they will not be in sin, and God will take care of them. And next week, chapter 19, the red heifer. That's really good. We got some prophecy going on in there, so I love it.
Who would like to bring dessert next week?
You're looking straight at me.
No, I'm not. I'm not looking, I didn't mean to be looking right at you.
I will bring one.
I didn't know, well, I didn't know who was gonna be here.
And would you
As far as I know, I'll be here, but I'm
You want
not
me to
do
sure.
the recording for me there,
Yeah, I'm
Kate?
not
Next
sure
week,
either.
by the
It
way,
depends
next
on my
week,
hubby.
next week, we're gonna be doing Numbers 19 through 24.